welcome everybody to today's webinar. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Cheryl Hart and I'm on the board of the Coalition of Refuge Friends and Advocates. And I'm not going to take a lot of time today except to remind you to please put your name and the friends group you're affiliated with in the chat so we know who you are and who's here. And also, as we go along, if you have questions that come up as we go along, we have a panel today, so 3 speakers. Please write your questions in the chat and we'll have time at the end for questions and answers. You will receive a recording of the session and it will also be posted on the Corfo website under the Resource Center. So all of that, and also I'll be including the sign-up information in case you are not receiving invitations to these webinars or you know someone who might be interested. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Tom, who will introduce today's speakers.
Thank you, Cheryl, and welcome everyone to this month's webinar. It's great to see you all. So many people. This is awesome. I see names I recognize. I am Tom Worthington. I'm on the board of Corfa, and I'm also on the board of the Minnesota Valley Refuge Friends Group. I retired after a 38-year career with the Fish and Wildlife Service, all of those years with refuges, and I've worked with cooperating associations and refuges of all shapes and sizes and varieties for the entirety of my career. I know how important friends groups are to the hatchery system and to the refuge system. And I know that friends groups are kind of a multi-dimensional force for conservation. But the most important strength that we have as friends groups is that we are an organized voice for nature. We are able to speak directly and without filters to elected officials about refuge and hatchery needs. We can speak and act where Fish and Wildlife Service employees are not permitted to do so. This is our greatest strength, and this is the subject of this afternoon's webinar. How can friends groups communicate more effectively with elected officials and be better advocates for refuges and hatcheries? We're lucky to have 3 excellent panelists today, each with a slightly different perspective on how we can more effectively communicate with elected officials. Our first speaker will be Peter Stein, Vice President of the Friends of Hakalau Forest National Wildlife Refuge, and chair of that Friends Group's Legislative and Public Relations Committee. Peter's been involved in wildland conservation and management for over 40 years, working for both the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the Forest Service before retiring. Peter is that rare bird who both understands how ecological systems work, and he understands how to help land managers correctly apply the science to management decisions on the ground. We're very fortunate to have with us Jen Burks. Jen is a senior policy advisor for U.S. Senator Mazie Hirono of Hawaii. Jen has been a key staffer for Senator Hirono for 10 years. She handles natural resource, ocean, climate change, and agricultural policy issues for the senator. She will give her insights into how friends can effectively communicate and advocate for their issues. And lastly, we will hear from Bruce Anderson. When Bruce retired in 2020, he was the Director of Health for the state of Hawaii. Among other positions he's held, he was the first state epidemiologist. He had been the CEO of the Hawaii Health Systems Corporation, the public healthcare system for the state of Hawaii. He was president of the Oceanic Institute for 5 years. He knows how to work effectively with federal, state, and local elected officials. Each of our panelists will speak for about 10 to 15 minutes. It might be best to hold your questions to the end for everyone, but feel free to load your questions into the chat stream at any time. And if there's something that you think is critical to ask, feel free to put that note in your chat and one of our moderators will ask the question. Okay, let's get started. Peter, we're going to start with you. You can describe how your friends group has organized yourselves to be an effective advocate for your refuge.
Yeah, thanks. So I wanted to give you kind of a real quick overview of the refuge. It's probably a refuge that a lot of people are not that familiar with. So I have a few slides just to describe it. First of all, well, go to the next slide, thanks. So it's on the Big Island. It started out as the Hakalau unit. It's in the recent years, we've added some lands on the Kona side. All of this was for the purposes of protecting and managing native forest habitat for the incredible complement of animals and plants that are endemic to Hawaii and in many cases endemic to this island. The Hakalau unit is about 33,000 acres. It's in the range of about 2,500 to 6,600 feet elevation. I'll be focusing on discussion around Hakalau, but Kona is also an important component of the refuge and our management efforts. Next slide. So here's just a sampling of the species that we're concerned with. In particular, you could see in the middle our logo, which is a drawing of the Akiapola'au, which is on right to the left of it. That's one of our most iconic species. It's extremely rare, only found on the Big Island. And we have a variety of other native forest birds, some of which shown here, such as the akepa, the Hawaii creeper, the iwi, and the elepaio. And we also have a lot of rare plants on the refuge. And so the efforts are all oriented around protecting and enhancing habitat conditions for the native birds and plants. Next slide. The Friends group was formed in 2006, and it's a very active group. We have a board of 14 people, and we're involved in a whole variety of projects, including building an endowment to help with management of the refuge. We're really active in the Walk for the Wild, the first 2 years of that. We have many volunteer trips up to the refuge. We've done a lot of planting of koa trees and other native plants. We're working on building a visitor services program to provide more access and interpretation of this amazing place. We put out a quarterly newsletter. We're on Facebook and Instagram. And so let's move to the next slide. The conservation success has been remarkable. In particular, you could see this slide. One of the biggest achievements of the refuge has been the reforestation of areas that used to be koa ohia forest, but were logged and converted to pasture lands for cattle grazing over the last 100 years. When the refuge was acquired in 1985, so began the effort to reforest this landscape, and almost 5,000 acres have been reforested, and that's some of the best habitat for the native birds, particularly because it's above the mosquito line. I won't have time to dwell on that, but the biggest threat to all the native birds throughout Hawaii is avian malaria that is carried by mosquitoes. Next slide. Another enormous threat are the variety of introduced ungulates, especially pigs, but also cattle, sheep, goats, and all sorts of things. Non-native, there are no native mammals to Hawaii except for the Hawaii hoary bat. So the vegetation evolved without any defenses for browsing or grazing or trampling, and so particularly pigs is kind of the central management issue. It's also a bit of a controversial issue because pigs are popular for hunting, traditional hunting for some of the community. Next slide. Climate change is an enormous threat in many ways, but the big one I alluded to is that the mosquito, which carries avian malaria, is restricted to elevations below about 4,000 feet. But with climate change, it's moving upslope. And as mosquitoes move upslope and spread avian diseases, those areas starting to drop out in terms of supporting particularly the rare species. So again, I wish I had more time to talk about that, but managing habitat and keeping it mosquito free are some of the biggest issues that we're trying to support. Next slide. There are many other threats, other introduced species, both animals and plants. Hawaii is kind of a poster child for the impact of invasive species of every ilk. Some of the invasive plants, like you could see in the lower photograph there, a plant called gorse, which is native to the British Isles and is a worldwide pest, and it's spreading throughout over the higher elevations of the Big Island. Many different introduced plants and animals that are a challenge to maintaining this forest. Next slide. Okay, so that's a background quickly on the refuge, and I want to emphasize here that the refuge is hard to reach. It's accessible only along about a 10-mile, pretty rough dirt road. Once you get up the saddle road, it takes about hour and a half or so from Hilo, the closest community. And as a result, it doesn't get the visitation that we'd like to see. I mean, we know that visitation and appreciation of what the refuge is for is a big challenge, and every refuge that can provide visitation and public use, I think benefits so that people understand and are able to experience firsthand. So with that backdrop, I'm going to focus now real quickly on our Legislative and Public Affairs Committee. We formed this committee a little over a year ago. With the growth of our activities, we felt it was time to reach out more demonstratively to the elected officials and their staff, both at the federal, state, and local level. So we formed this committee. I believe we have about 6 or 7 members. And our initial thrust has been to reach out to the congressional delegation. In Hawaii, that is 2 senators and 2 congresspeople. That's so it makes it manageable, but we had an initial round of contact last year, and we're in the process of planning another round of contact this year. Our purpose is primarily just to make both the elected officials and their staff aware of the issues going on around the refuge, and to help familiarize them with the refuge itself. You know, we have the advantage of being able to reach out and talk freely to the congressional people. The refuge obviously doesn't, but we can speak on all the issues that are challenging management of the refuge. So we formed this committee. We set sideboards on what we can do. The board, the 14-member board, meets monthly and votes on issues. But we arranged for this committee to have some latitude to act on behalf of the board on issues that are considered not especially controversial. We bring those issues to the board, but we need to be nimble to respond to issues that come up. And we've already done that several times when there was an issue that came up and we deemed it important for us to respond to, and so we have done that. So this year, we're engaged in activities to talk again with the congressional delegation, all 4 of them, and their staff, both in Washington, D.C. and locally in Hawaii. We make those contacts. Our committee has assignments. So we have a person on the committee who's assigned to 1 or more of the congressional delegation. And so we make arrangements to meet with them in person and just discuss what's going on. We feel that we can be a very important conduit of information on what's happening at the refuge, what the issues are, the conditions of the species, and any questions that the delegation might have. We're ready there to answer them. One of the ways we're handling that is we built a set of talking points for our meetings with the delegation. And we have that, and we can leave it behind for information. And so we want to basically establish relationship with the delegation so that they feel comfortable using us as a source of information and reaching out to us with questions, any questions at all. Ultimately, we expect we will get into discussions about help for the refuge. That's not our initial primary purpose, but it is obviously something that will come up at some point in our discussions. So we're prepared for that. But again, our primary purpose is to establish a relationship and to have that sort of two-way conversation on a continual basis. We're also now planning to reach out to the state elected officials, both senators and the legislators, and also to the Big Island, the county of Hawaii, and their elected officials as well. In fact, earlier this year, one of our board members, who I think is on the call, Peter Young, reached out to the mayor of Hawaii and helped to get the mayor to proclaim this to be the year of the forest bird, which has also been declared by the State Department of Land and Natural Resources. So we're making those kind of contacts, and ultimately we believe it's going to be beneficial for the Friends group and beneficial for the refuge, just to make sure that these elected officials are more familiar with the issues and with the nuances of those issues, which there are actually many. So that's basically what we're doing, and we find it very rewarding to be able to make these contacts and establish relationships and discuss these issues. We have a very versatile and experienced board with expertise in many, many areas. So we're in a good position to be able to address issues that come up. Is Mike on the call? I'm not sure if he is.
I am on the call. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Okay, so I want to just invite Mike Scott, Dr. J. Michael Scott, to make a comment or two about his experiences of reaching out to elected officials. He was the scientist who started the Hawaii Forest Bird Survey back in the 70s, and his work resulted directly in the establishment of the refuge. So Mike, give us a minute or two of your thoughts.
Well, just reflecting back on my interaction with congressional delegations and other at the science policy interface, one of the biggest things you can do is think about your discussion and the points you want to make with the individuals, find out what their interests are, and with respect to the topic you've got, think of a slide or a graphic that is one-stop shopping. And for me, talking to congressional delegation, Daniel Inouye, actually it was Kelvin Takeda did most of the talking to Daniel, Senator Inouye, was a slide showing the distribution of forest birds in the islands versus the protected areas. And Hakala stood out as one of the hot spots for endangered species, but it was a gap in the conservation network for forest birds in the Hawaiian Islands. That gap then was identified as an area in need of additional protection, and that one slide told the story. And then Senator Inouye attained the funds to acquire Hakala Forest National Wildlife Refuge, starting with the Shipman, 5,000 acres of the Shipman Ranch in 1983, 84. So those types of one-stop shopping for a graphic is really important with respect to the topic you're trying to convey. Any questions on that?
Yeah, so I'm not sure when we're taking questions, but I'm done with my presentation. So I'll either take questions now or we'll turn it over to Jen. What, Tom, are we gonna take
Yeah,
questions?
I think we'll hold questions till the end, I think.
Okay.
So,
Great.
All right, well, then let me introduce Jen Burks. Jen works with Senator Mazie Hirono. She's on the staff there, and it's great to have Jen with her experience. And, you know, that's where the rubber meets the road, is when we can make those contacts with people who are actually working with the elected officials and are able to really grasp the issues. So Jen, please, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Pete. So yeah, I'm Jen Burks. I've been working for Senator Hirono now for over a decade. Am very grateful to work for the state of Hawaii and have constituents like Pete and Bruce and others that are part of this discussion today. So I have a couple goals to achieve in my discussion. First of all, I apologize, I don't have slides, so hopefully I'm engaging enough that I don't bore you all to tears or to sleep or whatever. But I want to first let you know that, the congressional officials and their staffs are human beings. We're people just like you. So it's not, please don't be intimidated or scared to request a meeting with us. There's two different types of meetings you can request. You can request a staff level meeting, so you're just engaging with staff, or you can request a meeting with the member of Congress, either a House member or a Senate member. And usually there's two different ways of going about that. So if you are just interested in meeting with staff, you can reach out to your local office in the state, or you can reach out to the DC office if you're going to be in DC, and just ask, whoever is at the front desk, ask them who handles National Wildlife Refuge issues for the member of Congress, and they can provide you a name and an email, and you can just directly reach out to that staff member and say, hey, I'm a constituent. I'd love to come to the office, meet with you, talk about the refuge, and talk about, our priorities. And staff would be happy to chat with you and do those meetings. Alternatively, if you want to meet with the member of Congress, usually you can go to their website. So for example, Senator Hirono's website is hirono.senate.gov. A lot of members of Congress usually follow that format. So you can go on the website and there's usually an option to request a meeting, and you fill out a form, and that form goes to the office, and then the senator scheduling team works to see if the senator's schedule can accommodate a meeting. And so for us, there's an option to meet with her in Honolulu, which is where our state office is, or there's an option to meet with her in DC. So, depending on where you're going to be located, you can request a meeting. And like I said, then, her scheduling team will determine whether or not her schedule allows for a meeting. And then oftentimes, if for whatever reason the member of Congress is unable to meet with you folks, then usually it goes on to the staffer who's responsible for that meeting to set a meeting up. So those are a couple different types of meetings that you can request, and then ways of going about making those requests. So then once you get the meeting, I would encourage you to share some background information, some context about the refuge. You can go ahead and share that before the meeting, especially if you're meeting with a staffer directly. You can send it in an email just to help orient them to the topics that you may be discussing. And then I would assume, so most meetings on the Hill are 30 minutes, and with understanding that a lot of meetings run late, I would realistically plan for about 20 minutes with the staff or the member of Congress. So I would encourage you to really think about what you want to discuss. And so to the comment that was just made about like share a picture that tells a story, like get very specific very quickly, because from my perspective, our job here in Congress is to help our constituents. So if you come and you say, hey, forest birds, they're declining and we don't have a lot of habitat to protect them. That's very specific and you can get to the details very quickly. So I would really encourage you to think about what you want your member of Congress to know. What do you want their staff to know? And, another example that I can think of is Great American Outdoors Act. That is a bill that has infused a lot of funding into addressing deferred maintenance needs at refuges, roughly $95 million a year. If you have a project in your refuge that has benefited from that funding, invite the staff and the senator or the House member to come and visit that project and see how that money has been utilized in their refuge and how that funding has benefited that refuge. Those very specific things are really helpful because I think support of refuges is a bipartisan thing. People love refuges. And so if you come to me and say, we love refuges, I do too, great. But like, how can I help? Tell me specifically how I and the senator and Congress can help improve your refuge and improve visitation or, things of that nature. So those are kind of like the two main points that I wanted to make. And just to help you see that we're just people like you and I'm fortunate I work for a member who very much loves wildlife refuges, so I can say I agree with you folks. We need to conserve and protect, and just let us know how we can help. And with that, I know it was short. I'm happy to take questions, I think, at the end when folks are ready. So I'll yield back a couple minutes of my time and go ahead and introduce the next speaker. So this will be Bruce Anderson. He was the director of the State Department of Health for Hawaii, and I've been fortunate to work with Bruce for a number of years. So I'll turn it over to him.
Thanks, Jen. I particularly appreciate your point about not being intimidated. I worked in the state government for many years, and I've enjoyed serving on the Hakalau board. I'm not a board member, but I've been helping with some of the communications issues. I actually came to enjoy meeting with our congressional delegation and others elected in Hawaii. I never thought I would. It was always intimidating for me to go up there, but I eventually got around to actually enjoying my meetings when I got over that. I wanted to stress that all politics is based on relationships, and our elected representatives see dozens of constituents every day. I don't know how many you see, Jen, but I'm sure it's a dozen or more. And of course, the elected officials probably not seen many more of them. And if you have a relationship with them, you're much more likely to be able to communicate quickly and effectively than if you don't. So getting together with them regularly, getting them to know you and is invaluable. If they don't know you, they're not going to be able to help you when you really need their help and when you need something. And I should add that goes for elected officials at the state and county levels as well. I think Tom spoke to this, but I have to emphasize it that the Park Service have terrific staff and they're wonderful, but there are constraints that they have in dealing or talking to elected officials. In fact, they simply can't do it. So one of your jobs, I think one of the most important things that Friends can do is to establish those lines of communication with the legislators and to maintain those lines of communication so that they're aware of what's going on and they can help as needed. A few do's and don'ts I'm going to share. First of all, again, don't be intimidated when you meet. It can be very scary and intimidating to visit a congressional office in DC. They're designed to impress. You get in there and there's a leather couch you have to sit on for longer than you would like usually, and then you have to try to find something to read and pass the time while you're there, and that's always stressful. But you'll find once you get past that most all the staff I've known of course, all the representatives are very friendly. That's one of the reasons they're there. That's why they get elected. They're friendly and easy to talk with in most cases. That personal connection is really helpful in communicating in the future. I think Mike Scott mentioned this, and is do your homework. When you visit elected officials, it's important to know their interests. Wildlife protection and conservation may not be on their top of their list of important issues, but I don't know any of them that would say that it's not important, and I think that's something you should be aware of when you go to meet with them. They are interested in, and although they may not have a lot of current hot issues associated with conservation, particularly in your refuge, they are wanting to know more about what's happening in that area. You or a representative from your friends group should meet with elected officials regularly. I think once a year is probably a minimum amount of time you'd want to meet with them, just to brief them on what's going on. So I would recommend that. And at the same time, even meeting with state and local officials is important. And again, there's no one in a better position than you are to meet with them. You have nothing to gain personally from meeting with them. That's unlike many of their constituents who are looking to get something for themselves or for their organization, or for their company or something else. I think you're really there trying to do the good thing. Getting down to some other quick recommendations, I would suggest a short letter of introduction from the president of your friends group would be helpful. Debbie Anderson, happens to be my wife, was president of the Friends, and she sent a short letter of introduction to that Jen probably saw and others see in the delegation, and they did that before our visit last summer, and provided a little basic information on who we were and what we were there for. And I think that's helpful. And as Jen said, you can meet with elected officials almost anywhere, but it's always nice to see them if you're in DC. With state officials, meet them in their state offices at the state capitol. That's probably where you want to meet with them, and I would encourage that, particularly those people who are representing your district. Council members, same thing. They would be in the municipal buildings, but do take the time to meet with them. Again, you can be the spokespersons for the refuge, and they're not hearing it from a lot of other people. One thing that hasn't not been mentioned, I can think of, is that summer recess, I should say, is an excellent time to invite them to take a tour, but also just to see them at home. They're usually more comfortable meeting at home, and although they don't have a lot of time, they're at least it's more convenient. Some staff I've talked to, especially from Hawaii, have been to the refuges. Encourage them to come back again. It's because things change and the issues change for sure. But the time during their summer recess is very short, and it fills up quickly. So don't wait until the summer to invite them to meet. And another thing that I think was mentioned, but I'll have to emphasize, is that most meetings in DC result in meetings with congressional staff only. There are far more congressional staff, and they can meet, or the elected official may not be able to meet. Likewise, sometimes only a staff member is able to visit your refuge. Be sure you invite them. Don't be disappointed or underestimate their power. Members of Congress rely on their staff more than anyone else in decision making. And further, you're going to be following up with them probably, like we do with Jan in Hawaii, on various issues. They're the ones who keep track of what's going on, and they have time. I think Pete mentioned the talking points. I think that's really important to have. First of all, make sure that, if you share talking points with the other board members, you can be pretty sure that you're at least not off base on issues. But it's also a real nice leave behind. There are undoubtedly issues you'd like to talk with them about, you don't get to. And if you leave some talking points and they see something there they're interested in that you didn't talk about, they can get back to you and ask you more about that. And then finally, after the visit, send a thank you note. That's always appreciated. And if there has been a visit planned, be sure that you follow up on that and arrange that as soon as you can. There's a few other things that the friends groups can do that I think can benefit a refuge. Obviously, written testimony on the refuge is helpful. This is important with national legislation. COFRA urged friends to submit testimony to the House Appropriations Committee for 2025 recently, and we did. Debbie Anderson, the president, did send in support to Chairman Simpson and other high-ranking members. But you know, those testimonies are seen by lots of people besides them. The testimony focused on the $602 million that the administration was asking. However, it's also an opportunity to remind the committee members of the issues in your refuge. In our case, the dire future of our forest birds. Extinction of some of these species is a real possibility in the next few years, and Hucklew Forest perhaps is the only safe refuge for those endangered birds because it's so much higher and away from the mosquito zone. But all opportunities you can use those to help decision makers know about the refuge and its importance. Again, state and county officials should be aware of that. Pete mentioned the annual Walk for the Wild. That's a tour essentially. We had 500 people attend last year, October 23, including 2 elected council members from the Big Island. There was a National Wildlife Refuge Expo in DC back in November of 2023. That was the first one since COVID. We heard about it and actually attended that. It helps to be an hour or 2 away from DC. It makes it much more convenient for us to go and to these kinds of events. But she personally called and invited all of our congressional delegation to attend the day of the event, and they all came. It was incredible to me. It seemed at one point the whole room was filled with people from Hawaii. There are representatives from many other conservation groups there, including COFRA. But I was pleased to see everyone that we knew had attended. And so we'll be there again this year. That's there are not a lot of those events, but it'd be great to send someone to those if you can. Newsletters, make sure that you add the federal, state, and county elected officials to your newsletter address list and keep it up to date. Of course, people change in office, but make sure that they're on that list. They actually, at least the staff, actually read those newsletters pretty carefully, and it's a good way to keep track of what the interests, what you're doing, and so forth. So it's easy to do, and I would do it regularly. And there are even things like proclamations. I think Pete mentioned Peter Young's efforts, but one of the things that, you know, it seems sort of silly to have these proclamations. I always thought they were sort of ridiculous. Year of the whatever, and this case it was Year of the Forest Birds or some day. But you know, it's a wonderful opportunity for groups to show solidarity, and in this case, there were over a dozen organizations, including the Friends of Hucklew, who came to the ceremony that was organized on the Big Island. And it's a nice opportunity to talk about the importance of partnerships and organizations. So I'll end there. I wanted to stress a couple of points. First, politics is based on relationships. Get to know your elected officials and give them a chance to know your refuge. It's important that your refuge be appreciated and supported at the national, state, and local level. And to accomplish this, you need to meet on a regular basis, not just when a crisis or problem needs immediate attention. And one last tip, besides leaving behind talking points, bring food. In Hawaii, we have lots of unique local foods to choose from. We have chocolate-covered macadamia nuts, but donuts, sweet rolls are always appreciated. So those are my words of wisdom, and I'm also glad to answer any questions. Thank you.
Well, thank you all. Let's see, Joan or Cheryl, have you been monitoring the stream? Do we have any questions? I know I
We
haven't.
don't. We don't have any questions in the chat box, but I have a question that I'll start things off since there aren't any there. And this is probably maybe a question for Jen, but if any of you have ideas, please, please feel free to contribute. Our refuges, as I'm sure many refuges, fall into more than one congressional district. I live in a congressional district, on one of the congressional districts, but not the other, which means it's easy for me to make connections with my own representative. But how do I make those connections with a representative who represents the refuge, but I'm not a constituent in her district any longer? Any ideas about how to make those contacts and keep up the connection? We had a good connection with with that representative, and then when they redistricted us, I was moved out of that district into a new one. So how do I keep up those relationships with a representative who is no longer my representative?
I can just jump in and say, you know, I think I would still very much encourage you to reach out to that representative and just say, hey, you know, I'm myself not a constituent, but I'm hoping to chat with you about something that is in your district and is important to your constituents. If you do have a colleague that is a constituent for that representative that would be willing to join the conversation, even better. But I think, and I'm only speaking from my perspective and for my member, I would still very much be interested in chatting with you if the topic is of importance to the area that we represent. Is that helpful?
Yes, and we've done that. I just wondered, you know, if you go to the website and try to send a message, and they'll ask you for your zip code, and if you're not in the right zip code, you can't even send a message. So it makes it just more awkward to try and keep up communication sometimes.
I think then I would encourage you to call.
Yeah.
Call the office and ask for a good contact.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Could I weigh in on that a little bit too? I'll give you an example. There's one of our representatives, Ed Case. Representative Ed Case actually represents the big island of Oahu, Honolulu City and County, primarily, and is not his constituency is actually not on the neighbor islands. Ironically, he spent a lot of his life on the neighbor islands, and that's sort of to my point. You'd be surprised about the connections that many of these representatives have. Even if they don't live in the district, they may have friends in the district, relatives, or others who can influence their decisions and need to know what's going on. In Ed's case, Suzanne Case was head of the Department of Land and Natural Resources, now is at the University of Hawaii as their environmental guru, if you will, and actually helped to form Hakalau. So he has a very strong connection with Hakalau. I'm sure they talk about it occasionally. He's been there many times, but he's not in the district, that district. Likewise, there are others who aren't in the districts, but who have important connections in Congress and influence things politically that aren't necessarily representing the district with the refuge in it. So it's never a waste of time to talk to elected officials about the refuges. You'd be amazed at how many connections there are and how that might help down the line.
Yeah, and I think I'll add, as a friends group, there's nothing constraining us from reaching out to others who are perhaps not in the district we happen to live in. I mean, it's easy in Hawaii because we have 4 congressional members, and you know, Hawaii is a pretty tight, close-knit community. So all 4, we've targeted all 4 of the congressional delegation for all of our communications. But you know, in California or any other state where there are many other representatives, I would reach out to anyone you think is potentially interested, even if it's not their district.
And we do have some questions in the chat for you. And just in terms of those connections, I would just point out that when we lived in Oregon, my husband did a lot of work in DC. He would then fly out the same time as the congressional district. He made a lot of connections about the refuge system on those flights. especially when he would give up his first-class seat to some member of Congress. So question in the chat. What does success look like for effective communication with elected officials? Secondly, how does one measure success?
Well, I can say from our perspective, it's a little early to tell, but I think success will be establishing a relationship and a trust that the members and their staff feel comfortable reaching out to us with questions about what's going on. So as we said many times, our main purpose is to establish relationships and lasting relationships so that we can have a continuous two-way conversation.
And I would just follow up and say, for me, a lot of the success would be the inverse, right? Having a relationship where Pete, Bruce, anybody is like, hey, Jen, this issue came up. How, I want the senator to be aware. I want XYZ, and we could have that conversation. Being in DC and not on the ground, we rely on folks like you to tell us what's going on. We don't, I can't be in Hawaii everywhere all the time. And so that communication is really important. And I think in terms of types of communication, I think, again, like succinct, detailed things that are tangible to that refuge are really helpful. I can use the mosquito issue as an example. That is very specific to Hawaii. The Department of the Interior has made a lot of investments in trying to address avian malaria in Hawaii, and talking about how those how those funds have been utilized, and what the future needs are, what the future plans are. That's something tangible that then the senator can go and advocate for in committee to the federal agencies, et cetera. So just the more specific, more tangible asks are things that we can actually take and run with. And I think, you folks represent states all across the country, politics all across the country, understanding what your members interested in, and making sure that you kind of frame the conversation around that is really helpful.
Thank you, Jen. I had trouble getting off of mute. Did you have something to add?
Yeah, I think one of the things that hasn't been mentioned so much is the relationship between getting back to our elected officials in Congress, between them and other federal agencies. And we haven't talked about earmarks and other things that you might consider as measures of success. But having said that, just having an elected official, Senator Hirono or Ed Case or someone else, contact an administration official with the Department of Interior or Department of Defense, and that line of communication is very direct and very important to help to address issues, is invaluable. For example, we're looking at possibly having the Department of Defense help with maintaining roadways in and around the refuge, and it would be extraordinarily helpful to leverage your relationship with your representative to see if they could get some federal resources to be used for that purpose. Now, I bear in mind that this is not something that's happening now, but it's a possibility. But having that connection between with the federal agencies outside of the Department of Interior, for example, Defense and others, is sometimes extraordinarily valuable. So having them help with the problems that you're having, whether it's with funding or just developing lines of communication with some of those other federal agencies, I think is very valuable. It's hard to put a dollar figure on that, but it's very important.
Thank you, Bruce. Okay, another question. This is from Libby Marking, who is the Director of Public Affairs for National Wildlife Refuge Association. And it's for Jen. She says, can you expand on the type of information that is useful to congressional staff when making decisions or bringing materials to their boss? Statistics, studies, stories, what tends to not be very useful in your experience?
I would say, so first of all, I love stats. I don't know that every staffer on the Hill loves stats, but I do. Again, I think, as specific and detailed as you can get on the issue that you're wanting to discuss, the better. Again, just saying, oh, we need more funding for the National Wildlife Refuges. That's less inspiring to me for action than, hey, because of the budget cuts, our friends group has been having to fundraise more to support the operations and maintenance of our refuge that used to be covered by administrative funds, and these are the impacts that it's having. That is a lot more compelling to me. And so I think just the more specific and the more examples you have in that specific refuge or the refuges in your region, I think that would be very helpful.
Thanks, Janet. If you don't mind me hopping on that, I'm glad you had that answer because I think that really illustrates the point where me as the DC person who's like lobbying for the refuge system as a whole, where I'm really only talking about the top point, we need 602 million, we need more funding for refuges generally. I really need friends to come in and do that very specific local advocacy that I don't have all those details written down. Yep. So I really need you guys helping us on this journey. So thank you for that answer. I think that's exactly what I was looking for.
Thank you, Libby, and thank you for asking the question. I don't see any more questions in the chat. We're almost at the end, and there are a couple of announcements that one that Joan wants to make and one that Mark wants to make. Tom, do you want to close out and then we'll make those announcements?
Yes, I do, but I do have one more question for Jen.
Okay.
I'm told that this is an election year, and there may be an additional recess in October. So again, it's another opportunity to get your invite your member or staff to spend time with you. But my question is really, well, two parts. Does this make a difference in your world that it's an election year and how we approach the members and their staff? But my second question is, in this age of Zoom and Teams meetings and electronic get-togethers, is it easier to schedule time with the staffer? I presume it is electronically, or is it worth the effort to meet in person?
So I'll get to your first question. Yes, we do have additional recess this fall because of the election year. So according to my calendar, and these calendars are available publicly, we will be in recess all of October and then the first week of November. That's the election time. And so does that functionally impact inviting members out to refuges? No. It does functionally impact DC staff potentially being in the state they represent during that time. If their member is up for re-election, for example, Senator Hirono is, I won't be able to travel. There are certain times of the year that I can't travel back to Hawaii on the official government's dime. And so that's the only impact. But state staff should be there. The senators and congresspeople will be back home. So overall, no, there's no impact. I would also say I have had the privilege of visiting a number of wildlife refuges in Hawaii, and Fish and Wildlife Service is very good about hosting. And so, they, on the official side, can host members of Congress. You folks can join and provide the context that they cannot necessarily. And so I would very much encourage you folks to work with Fish and Wildlife Service and hosting congressional staff and congressional members out to the refuges. I think that would be fine. And then, sorry, I forgot your second question.
It's about electronic meetings versus.
Oh, yeah. So I think a silver lining of the pandemic was these Zoom meetings. As I'm unique in that Hawaii's so far away, we don't have a ton of constituents that come to DC. And so I very much have benefited from being able to hop on these calls and meet with people more frequently. I would say I wouldn't replace Zoom meetings with having people to the refuges in person. There's nothing that can replace having those experiences in person. So like if there's something really important that you want to show staff or members of Congress, have that in-person visit to the refuge.
Thank you. And I want to thank our panel, including Dr. Mike Scott. Good to see you again, Mike. For spending time this afternoon with us and with our friends from around the country. It is a good time to make the invitations. Summer recess, October recess coming up. Corfa and the Refuge Association are updating their recess toolkit, which is a handy downloadable package of information that will aid you in setting up meetings, understanding how to present your information in a concise manner. The Friends of Hakalau have also graciously provided some of their talking points in their materials, and those are downloadable. And I think there's links in the chat chain, but they will also be downloadable from the Corfa website. The recording of this will be available, I believe, online to those who have missed the call, but who registered. And then I think, Joan, this will be available on your normal resource site. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. The recording will be there, the recess action kit, and the materials that the Friends of Hakalau have provided, including the talking points and sample testimony to the Senate.
Well, that will wrap it up from my point of view. Joan or Cheryl, do you have anything you want to conclude with?
Just want to recognize Mark. Mark has an announcement for the participants.
Sure. My name is Mark Misaias. I too, like Tom, am a Corfa board member and had a 38-year career with the Fish and Wildlife Service, mostly with the National Wildlife Refuge System. Since joining the board, one of the things that the board is wanting to do is focus on advocacy. It's created an advocacy working group, which is comprised of both board members and Friends members around the country at large. One of our goals for Corfa is to encourage more advocacy committees to be developed at Friends groups. And so what we want to try to do, just give you a heads up, we're wanting to send out a very simple survey form or questionnaire to Friends groups and basically ask 3 questions. Do you have an advocacy committee, or however you call it? And how is it? Tell us a little bit about it. How is it comprised? And do you work local issues or national issues, things like that? And then the most important question that will help our committee go forward would be, what are your needs? So how can we help you as an advocacy committee work more effectively? And we want to be able to get Friends groups to be able to advocate locally, just like we saw with Hakalau and the forest bird situation, but also be part of a network of Friends groups that are wanting to support the National Wildlife Refuge System and the hatchery system.
Thank you, Mark. Joan, do you still have any more announcements for the end?
The only other announcement I have is the next webinar, which will be in July, will be about the governance of nonprofits. And that announcement will be coming out from the Refuge System. I'm not from the Refuge System, sorry, folks, from the Refuge Association. So if you're not, or you know people who are not on their mailing list, please let them know to go to that website and sign up so that you can get that notice. That's it for me.
Thanks, Joan. Thank you, everybody, for participating, and we'll look forward to seeing you next month when we'll learn more about how to govern these organizations that we're all a part of. Thank you very much. We really appreciate all the speakers, all the questions, and everyone's participation. We'll see you next month.
Thank you.
Bye all.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.